Hello everyone, I'd like to thank you for coming today. My name is Joseph Shonkwiler, and today I'm going to talk to you about swords. When you were a child, did you ever imagine you were a knight? Maybe you imagined you were one of King Arthur's Knights of the Round Table. Maybe you imagined you were somebody like Joan of Arc. Maybe you imagined you were one of the courageous men and women from the Lord of the Rings, such as Aragorn or Eowyn. Whatever may have captivated you as a child, whether it was tales of King Arthur or of hobbits, they all have one common thread, and that is swords. Today I'm going to talk to you about the different components that make up a sword. Now, I have always been fascinated with such things as swords and dragons and giants and the like, as I'm sure many of you have. And today I still am. As a matter of fact, I have learned how to fight with a two-handed longsword such as this. I've also learned how to fight with such things as daggers and other forms of swords. But enough about me. Today we're going to talk about swords and the two main parts that make up a sword. And they are the blade and the hilt. Now, the first thing to talk about when considering sword parts is the blade. At the very top of the blade is what is referred to as the tip. The tip on this sword is double-edged. This makes it much easier to stab into and pull out of whatever you're fighting, whether it's a man or an animal. In the book Swords and Hilt Weapons by Michael D. Coe and 8 other authors, all of them museum curators, researchers, and professors, they point out that noblemen and other people would often carry swords with them on hunts. And at such times, sometimes they would commission the making of a sword with an extra wide tip for stabbing into a wild boar to make sure that you kill it. Now, next, what we would consider is the edge, or what is sometimes called the cutting edge. Now, often you'll want to stab and to thrust with your sword, but most of the time you will be trying to inflict damage with the cutting edge of your sword. Now, some swords have only one edge. This is a double-edged sword, but some only have one. In the book Knives, Swords, and Daggers by Gerald Wayland and Bernard Levine, they point out that on some one-edged swords, the first few inches of the tip of the sword is sharpened on the unsharpened edge. This makes it like a two-edged sword like this, and is easier to stab into and pull out of whatever you're attacking. Now, next is the groove that runs along the inside of both parts of the blade. In an online article by Joe Talmadge, A.G. Russell Knives, the successful manufacturer of knives and other bladed weapons, was answering questions sent in to them by customers. They were inquiring as to what this particular part of the sword was. Often they would refer to it as a blood groove. The idea with calling this a blood groove is that you stab something, and when you stab it, the blood drains out more quickly through this groove and causes the whatever you're attacking to bleed more, thus killing it quicker. But this is incorrect. They point out that the two main functions of this groove are to, 1, strengthen the blade, and 2, reduce its weight. Now, as you can see, there's less metal here. It's a big opening. So less metal equals less weight. You want your sword to be nice and light for when you're swinging it around. And now, the part of the blade that you cannot see is called the tang. The tang is much more thin than the rest of the blade, and it is secured into the hilt of your weapon, so you can have a handle to swing your sword around. Now that we've talked about the blade from tip to tang, let's talk about the hilt. Now, this causes some confusion as people don't really know what the hilt is exactly most of the time. Often they think that this part right here is the hilt. Sometimes they think this section is the hilt, where you grip the sword. Neither is accurate. And basically every part of the sword that is not the blade is the hilt. Everything from here on down is referred to as the hilt. At the top of your hilt you have a cross guard or a guard. Its name is pretty self-explanatory, as its main function, is to guard your hand from sliding onto the blade and cutting your hands up. The next section of the sword is what is referred to as the grip, because obviously this is where you grip onto the sword. Often they would be made of metal or of wood. Now, neither of these things is particularly comfortable to hold as you swing your sword around and attack, so often it will be wrapped in something such as leather, as is the case with my sword here. The grip is also where the part of the blade called the tang is secured into for the handle of the sword. Below the grip is what is called the pommel. Now the name pommel comes from a Latin word that means little apple. The pommel is simply a counterweight for your sword. It's very important because it gives you more control over your sword as you swing it around. Without it, it would be very difficult to fight with a sword. And that pretty much sums up the different parts of a sword. My purpose this evening has been to hopefully demystify swords, and because there are a lot of misconceptions about different parts of swords and it can be a bit confusing. So to review, two different parts of the sword are the blade and the hilt. The blade is made up of the tip, the edge, the fuller, and the tang, which is inserted into the hilt. The hilt is made up of the cross guard, the grip, and the pommel. Swords have been an important part of our history. Just think about where we'd be without them. Just think about where our favorite heroes would be without them. And they certainly couldn't afford to be in the dark about any part of their swords. Eowyn couldn't have slain the Witch King without a sword. King Arthur's knights couldn't have slain any dragons without a sword. And King Arthur himself, well, he never would have been king without a sword. Thank you very much.